Well, the U.S. and other G7 powers are holding crisis talks today on Ukraine with the Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky. The British Prime Minister, Liz Truss, is expected to insist that the group must not waver, quote, one iota in its support for Kyiv. Well, France 24's Philip Turle joins me on set to talk a bit more about this meeting today. Philip, what are the big issues going to be?
Well, one of the issues is going to be addressed by Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, and there's no doubt about the fact that he's going to call for more weapons to be deployed by the G7 nations in Ukraine to help fight against Russian forces. And in particular, he's going to ask for more air defense weapons. We've seen yesterday these air defense weapons have been used quite successfully to shoot down large numbers of missiles. That was something that Catherine Norris-Trent was just talking to us about in the country. But I think that there's growing frustration on the part of the Ukrainians that not more of these missile defense systems are coming in, and that would help them in shooting down missiles that could cause more attacks against the country, like the ones we saw yesterday. So I think that is going to be the main point of discussion at this meeting, and also what the response is going to be from the G7 towards Russia's attacks, and whether these can be considered crimes against humanity. If you look at Article 3, for example, of the UN Charter, the attacks that happened yesterday targeted civilian areas. That is considered a war crime by the United Nations, and also a failure to take measures to protect civilians, which could also be taken into account of what happened yesterday, could also be described as a war crime. The problem here is, of course, we're right in the middle of the war, and it's no time soon that we're going to see any Russian officials in the dock of the International Criminal Court to face charges of war crimes. But documentation is taking place all the time in Ukraine to note down what has happened there and what the main issues are as far as war crimes are concerned. I think that will also be a point of discussion during this G7 meeting today.
Now, Philip, this comes as Belarus yesterday threw its support behind Russia and Vladimir Putin. Tell us a bit more about that and what the G7 will say about that.
Well, Alexander Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, has kept a fairly low light during this Ukrainian conflict. Because basically, I don't think he wants his country to get involved in it. And he did say earlier on that there was no evidence that Ukraine was going to attack Belarus. So he owes one to Vladimir Putin, because it was Vladimir Putin who supported Alexander Lukashenko when he was running for re-election during those sham elections, where he then managed to pull off another term in office. So now Vladimir Putin is coming knocking on his door saying, I need your help. I need you to act as a support for Russian forces if they're going to launch an attack from over the northern border of Ukraine from Belarus. So there is, I think, a certain degree of anxiety in Ukraine itself as to what Belarus is going to do, what Russian forces or Belarusian forces are going to be used over that border into Ukraine. And I think that the message from the G7, when it meets in about an hour from now, is going to be basically to tell the leader of Belarus, don't get involved in this war and keep out of any attempt to try to help Russia gain more ground in Ukraine. That would reflect very badly on any future chords you would like to strike up with any of the neighbouring nations around that area who are already firmly in support of Ukraine and against Russia.
Philip, thank you for that. France 24's Philip Turle.